Hello friends, I am back and this is, well, first of all, I'm sitting in chaos right now. I'm in the middle of doing a bunch of like crafts and I don't even know how many orders I have. So it's a little chaotic in here, but you can't see that. You can't see any of that. Anyway, um, this is the last part of my trauma story. I'm trying to get through it as quickly as I can. I always say, I think I'm gonna read and then I end up like going on tangents anyways, but this time I really think I'm gonna read most of it. And so buckle up. Disclaimer, I always do one of these. I'm not a clinician or an expert, don't have a PhD. I'm just a nerd on the internet and a citizen of psychology. I have a phys ed degree. I'm almost done my psychology degree, hoping to get into other programs related to therapy, helping people, something psychological, any of that. Anyway, so there's that disclaimer, and then there's the trigger warning. There's a lot of difficult topics, like in my past videos, talking about mental illness, suicidality, abuse. I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. Anyway, so I left off when I was just going into grade 12. So this section deals with first grade 12 and grade 13. We stayed back a year, my best friend and I, so we could graduate with our friends from dance who were a year younger than us. Then I went to Queens for phys ed. That was my first undergraduate degree. And then COVID happens, and then we end up where we are today. So we're starting with grade 12 and grade 13. At this point, I had also mentioned that I was put on a medication called Cipralex for my anxiety. Yeah, so grade 12 was stressful, but like I was still having panic attacks a lot, but my hypervigilance wasn't as bad, wasn't as bad, but I was still having like uncontrollable crying spells. And I remember like I was put on it at the end of September of 2012, and then by the time October, November came around, the thing that I really noticed was that I wasn't able to concentrate and I wasn't able to like motivate myself to study. I was a lot more carefree when it came to that stuff, which helped because a lot of my anxiety was performance anxiety related to academics because I always had to achieve. Yeah, it took away a lot of my motivation to study. It was hard to concentrate, and like I was still not doing well when it came to like her blow-ups and stuff at dance. Still didn't really get to do normal teenager stuff. I wanted to do the Glee Club, I remember. I also wanted to do the play, and I had started doing the play. My high school is really big into the arts, and at this particular musical that we were doing required dancers, and I was like, I can be in this one. I'd like to, because a lot of my friends at the studio who went to this high school got to do it, and they looked like they had so much fun. And so I wanted to do it, you know, try and be a normal teenager for once. But because chronic exhaustion, perfectionism, her constantly needing me where and everywhere, yeah, I ended up having to quit. And like I was relieved because then I had a little bit of time for myself, but at the same time I was just like, it's never ending. So yeah, but the people who still remained on the play like stuff, again, her usual tactics, she would start speaking bad about them. They would miss sometimes in the mornings because, you know, play practice was in Saturday mornings. Like, it is what it is. And I remember her alleging that they came to the studio one day hungover, which like I don't think that's legit. But anyway, and like even if that's the truth, why are you talking about it behind the backs of these dancers who are minors to their friends who are also minors? Again, inappropriate behavior. The one thing about this though, about being on Cipralex, was I think because it kind of took some layers away and I was able to kind of digest what was going on around me. Maybe it was a combination of maturity and the Cipralex, I don't know. But there were a lot of things that I started to notice and feel really uneasy about regarding things that were going on at the studio. The first thing that I really started to notice and feel uneasy with was like her treatment of the kids. I had started teaching a lot more at this point. And so Like, she used to get mad at me for like how I ran my pre-dance classes, because you don't yell at 3-year-olds. You don't yell at kids, period. But like, 3-year-olds are out of control because they're 3-year-olds. Like, it is what it is. I remember one time I think I was assisting her with a class. I don't know. I was assisting her with something. They were doing choreography for the mini age group. And one of these kids was making a face at her when coach was trying to get her to do something with her leg, and she just kind of stood there and made a face. And she was like, well, you don't want to do it? Fine. Literally shoved her out of the way. And I'm like the kid was off balance and ended up catching herself. But like, it doesn't matter that she didn't get physically injured. What matters is that kind of thing is so unacceptable. As someone who, has the potential to be a gym teacher, for example, that kind of thing would get me fired. But why is it okay when it happens in this setting? Like, I don't understand. So that really alarmed me at one point. And I can't remember if that was grade 12 or grade 13, but I just remember being like, what kind of message does that send to the child? I don't care. Replaceable. That's how I see it. And yeah, that made me feel so uneasy. It's so uncomfortable. But the other thing too, I started really taking notice, and I do think it was a combination of maturity and Ciprolex, that she liked being mean. Well, she admitted it. She admitted she liked being mean. It was clear she liked power tripping children. She would brag about it. Like, I remember one time, I think I was at Queens by this point. I came in and she had a group of the kids, maybe like age 7 to 12. And then she stood up and pulled me aside, and she's like, yeah, I was just being really nice to them now because I was just mean to them before you got here. Like, laughing about it. And I'm like, what the fuck? Another time I remember, this was actually in my last year of teaching. This is one of the situations that made me go, I'm done. The kids came in after a competition. It was the next week. I was doing a stretch and tech class with them. And one of the little ones, she was maybe 8 or 9. She was young, and it was like her first year on the competitive team. So she hadn't quite figured things out yet. She was like, yeah, she looked defeated. They all looked defeated. But she was like, yeah, coach said we did really, really bad. And I'm like, what the it's so, like, that's not how you motivate kids. Like, it was bad. Anyway, I started to notice that those were things that were constant. And the other thing that used to really bother me as a teacher is if she saw that like a couple of kids might be talking while someone was teaching, she would just burst into the room. And it's a power trip. I personally think that she liked having that power trip, and she wanted robots. She wanted robots that would do what she said, when she said it, and as quickly as possible, and didn't talk back, and just, you know what I mean? This is probably why I was the favorite, because I knew this about her, subconsciously or not. I knew that that's what she wanted, and I had to comply to keep myself safe. Well, most kids aren't like that. So yeah, she just had no space or room for children being children. In grade 12 and 13, that's when I really started to develop like my teaching philosophy, sort of, in a way. I don't think I was conscious that I was doing that, but like, she was constantly telling me that I was too nice. And I'm not too nice. I meet kids where they're at. As a teacher, especially someone who works with young kids, it is my job, yes, to teach them, to model things for them, but it's my job also to adjust my behavior to fit what that child needs, especially in that like instance, like where they're at in development. The child does not adjust to the adult. I've worked with a lot of people and been taught by a lot of people who expect that of children. That's not their job. It's not their job as children to meet what you want. You have to adjust your behavior to meet where they're at developmentally. That's my job, and that's how I approach teaching. And so, like, I don't have to rage. I don't have to intimidate. I don't have to play mind games. One, because I know exactly how it feels to be that kid. But also, it's not necessary. We don't have to power trip and scream at kids to get them to listen. All that to say, it's so unnecessary. The other thing I started to really notice was the fact that at this point in grade 12, I was in exercise science. This was the class that made me like apply to phys ed and kinesiology when I like for university, because I absolutely loved this class. But when we were doing stuff on injuries and injury prevention and things like that, it's all very surface. It's like we're 17-year-olds, like, but what I was being taught by my teacher, who also did a phys ed program, was not what we were getting at the studio. So like, I also learned this again when I went to Queens in an even more depth of like, oh, so we should have been resting when we had these symptoms. Oh, we maybe had all these joint problems because we were doing too much. Oh, that's kind of where that was also shaking me up. There's a combination of things that kind of like started the slow, what's akin in like religious fundamentalism as deconstruction. I was deconstructing dance and how I was taught. But like, there were things that were just so like, when a dancer is injured, at least for me, I was afraid to say that there was something wrong because I knew it would make her upset. And this next story really illustrates that. So one of my friends / teammates, amazing athlete, like one of her top dancers, also just excelled at sports, period. That entire, like, the kids in that family were all good at sports and dance, and it was like, okay, like it was insane. Good athletes. This particular one, we were at dress rehearsal, and she ended up hurting herself at one point, and then it didn't really set in for her until she woke up the next morning, and her knee had swollen. She couldn't straighten it. The mom, I remember when she was relaying the story to us, she was saying like she was going to pass out because she was so panicked, right? And when coach got word of that, she spun it. First of all, anytime someone got injured, it was annoying for her. That says everything to me. That's like, I don't need to be a phys ed graduate to know that that's a red flag. The thing to do is you should be concerned about your athletes, not irritated because now it's inconvenient for you. Red flag. So she was irritated and spun it as, because the girls had their boyfriends there for dress rehearsal. Now, you can say what you want about that, that's fine, but what's not okay is to spin it and talk behind this athlete's back, who was a teenager, she was 16 years old, and say it was because she was showing off for the boys. Not okay. But the other thing too is what she used to say, like anytime someone from our rival studio would get injured, she'd be like, see, that's why we train as much as we do. I can't tell you how many of us, by the time we graduated, had so many joint problems. I had a knee problem. Again, it started when I was in around grade 11, grade 12, and I was afraid to tell her because I knew it would irritate her. At one point, my knee kept getting stuck because I had a torn meniscus and I didn't know. Eventually had surgery for that later on. But, yeah. I remember it got stuck at one point, and this was afternoon, Saturday of a weekend. We're dancing all day. And she saw that I made a face, and she's like, she had talked to one of the parents who was a physiotherapist to see if maybe she could help. She did end up like trying to give me exercises and stuff. But it was like nothing physio related. It was like, no, you need to like get your meniscus taken out. It keeps getting your knee locked. So, but when that happened and I kind of made a face and was like, she's like, well, she says you just need to stretch it out and it'll be okay. So when it happens, just stretch it. And that is what she said. But the tone of voice, again, highly sensitive person picks up on social cues like that. Annoying because it makes my life more stressful, but it also makes it really easy for me to break all of this down for y'all. tone, I knew she was mad about it. Why? One of her best dancers is injured too. But from what I know about injuries, we were doing too much. And while I can't really fault her for that, because at the time it was like, and there's still an element of this in youth sports of like more training is better. It's not. It's really not. It's not. We were being overtrained. And anytime someone from a rival studio would get injured, like I said, it was like, well, that's why we train so much. No, the reason why so many of us, especially our knees, a lot of us had knee problems, I think is because there was so much demand. I see kids all the time doing crazy things on hardwood floor, like just repeating it in every fucking dance, like these things that are bad for your joints. It's like, how long does this kid have before something happens to their joints too? It's not a coincidence, in my opinion. There's no coincidence. It's apparent to me, in my opinion, that this is correlated to the amount of stuff we were being asked to do in routines. And if you know, you know. Like, I remember, like, she would have us in jazz class do 8 Russians in a row. Like, why? We're on a hardwood floor. We're never gonna have to do that in a dance routine, so why are we doing it now? Don't know. Just to prove that we could. Hi. For some reason, I don't know why there's no introduction in this video, this section. So basically, I'm just moving on into just the next couple of things that I remember from grade 12 and grade 13 before I ended up at Queens. I remember one time, this is a Saturday morning, had just walked in. She was already angry about what? I don't know, but it became our problem. Walks over, hands me an iPod and goes, I need you to rehearse these kids. Turns around and walks back in. And I'm like, good morning. It's what, 11 a.m. on a Saturday. And this is how we're starting the weekend. I hate my life. Anyway, I ended up in the studio for doing some sort of routine. And I guess at that point, this is the 3 of us, me, my best friend, and the one who ended up hurting her knee later on that year. We were just some of her strongest, like turned together, and pretty much anytime there was an opportunity for us to do a turning sequence, we were front and center. Why? Because we turned together. At this point though, and again, I knew she didn't mean it like this, but like, it just shows the irrationality when she was angry. It was like, I guess we weren't turning properly, or we weren't turning together, and mid-dance, because she's angry, just is like, get out of my face, you guys never turn together. And I'm like, Tiana, I couldn't talk myself down. I'm panicked, trying to figure out what I could have done possibly wrong, what someone else could have done. But it's like, we turn together in almost every routine that there's an opportunity for us to turn together. Why? Because we turn together. So I'm like, okay, so we're not doing this part at all in the routine. I don't remember what happened next, but I just remember going home. Again, my mom had to do the, why is Tiana crying? That's what I put up with pretty much all day, that attitude. And I'm like, what the fuck? Anyway, like, clearly someone would have told us by now that we can't turn together, because we've been doing this for years now. There's really no point in doing the trio because we turn in half of that routine. So it serves no purpose. Yeah, that's interesting. Next day we come to do the same routine after my mom has intervened, comes in and looks at my friend and goes, you were the one who was off that time. That's all you needed to say. You don't have to have a hissy fit. All you need to do is say that. And guess what? She fixed it. Again, like, what could have saved so much anxiety. Anyway, yeah. There's one time in particular where it was a dance-related fit of rage. It was so unrealistic. So we came into the studio that night, and we were, I think it was Stretch and Tech. And she came in and she's like, so-and-so and so-and-so ended up holding a plank for like 13 minutes. And I'm like, holy cow, that's awesome. These kids were 9 and 10, okay? They were skinny, thin. They weren't they were prepubescent. if you remember from my previous videos, I highlight how the more muscle you have, the more energy it takes to do things with your body. Also, biomechanically speaking, it's harder when your hips are wider after puberty to hold things like this, especially after you've done an entire stretch and tech class where there's a lot of conditioning. So she tries to have us do it, and immediately I'm like, she's going to be pissed because we can't do it. We can't do it that long. This is the room of seniors, and I think intermediates too, by the way, who were some of her strongest and who won a shit ton for her. When we can't do it, she flies into a fit of rage. Get out here and sit on your splits. This was at the end of the class. At this point, I'm mad at myself because not because I couldn't do it, but because I couldn't not cry. And she was just disappointed and angry, and then I immediately start with the self-deprecating in my head. You're not good enough. You should have been able to do that. Like, why are you crying? You knew, like, all of these conflicting thoughts are like bumping up against each other in my head to the point where I'm mad because I could not start crying at that point. And we get up, leave. I couldn't hold it in. Thank God my mom was taking a tap class that night, because I don't know what I would have done. Walk in and I just exploded. I'm like, there's something wrong with me. I don't know what's going on. I'm fat. I'm out of shape. And I'm like, it's not true. Again, when you escalate, you can't think rationally. I had escalated now because she was just chronic, angry, was not relenting. So I just bawled my eyes out. My mom's like, what the fuck is going on? And I was like, I can't go back in there. I can't do this. We were supposed to be rehearsing for something. I don't know. It wasn't important. So I went out into the lobby and I'm like, hey, I'm really not feeling good. I really need to go home. And she's like, oh yeah, we're just going to be doing this. Walks. I'm like, what? Like Jekyll Hyde, ladies and gentlemen. Like I'm like, and then I'm gaslighting myself, like, was it as bad as I thought it was? No, it was. It's like, just, again, like, and I was so mad at myself that night when I went home because I was like, you are Tiana, you know better, you don't cry in front of her. You need to figure it out. And again, all the things that people had been telling me up until that point, all like doctors, you know, parents, coaches, you need to toughen up. You got to get thicker skin, kid. The world's just going to get harder from here. You're going to be an adult soon. At this point, I was an adult. And like those kinds of things would just play and play and play in my head. And like there was no relenting. It was awful. My brain and those pathways are being retrained to react this way. It's a constant survival mechanism. Even though it's like, I know I'm not going to be physically hurt, my subconscious doesn't know that. So my HPA axis is fucked. And it's just been constant to the point where my amygdala is overworking. It's constant. So it makes sense that as I got older, instead of being able to reason my way, because I've been exposed to this for so long, I'm getting worse. This next story is not necessarily something that like she did, but it just shows how like the effects and the negative self-talk and how bad it had gotten by this point. I was in grade 13 at this point. Again, this was nothing. She didn't trigger this episode, but the constant stress, the constant like just neglect. We were very mental illness illiterate at this point. So I didn't know what was wrong with me. We know now, and back then I didn't know. And again, like I had been told constantly, you need to get tougher skin, you know, it's just going to get harder from here. So something had happened. I think it was either physical exhaustion or something that I felt was not worthy of me not going in and teaching that day and not doing classes that night. And I just was in a really bad place. It could have been during the winter because I tended to dip in the winter. Seasonal affective problems. Love it. But this one was particularly bad. And trigger warning, this is where we get to unaliving ourselves or thinking of things like that. So something had happened. I just was beating myself up. Again, not triggered by my coach at all. I just learned how to do this to myself. And I've got all of these things spiraling in my head, and to the point where I just couldn't not turn it off. This was also the same day that the GI doctor that I had finally gotten sent. I was just like moved up from peds and finally had a GI doctor for in adulthood. This person dropped me because they felt like I was just unfixable. Well, I already thought I was unfixable mentally, and so now it's like physically. And so because of this constant, if anything, it was this situation that I think triggered it the most. My coach did actually reach out to me after this whole thing to see if I was okay. So that's a check mark for that. And I do think she was genuinely worried because I got really, like, it was not good. I considered taking Benadryl because I knew Benadryl could put you to sleep. And so I thought if I just took like the whole thing, I'd just fall asleep and never wake up. Because in my head, I'm like, this has been going on for years. The way the world works is you have to compete constantly. This is why I hate capitalism. You're never going to be able to function like everyone else. No one's able to help you mentally, physically, whatever. Everyone just says it's just going to keep getting harder from here. You're too sensitive. You've been told that for years since you were very, very young. You can't get thicker skin. You know, again, feeling very, very, very alone. And I was just like, that voice in my head, like in the back of my head, where I knew, like, no, you can't end it. There's like, I still had hope, right? So I didn't end up doing that. It was bad. It was the constant repeating the toughen up, you're too sensitive, that kind of thing. And just feeling like unfixable. And I felt very alone. So I considered doing that. I actually ended up just cutting myself, which is not a just cutting yourself. And then I ended up going to the hospital the next day because I was like, Mom, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm having an episode triggered by circumstances, likely seasonal things, having no information about trauma. And then I remember this too. The doctor who saw me after was like, you know, you really need to suck it up. I'm in psych in the hospital. I'm 19 years old. I just told you, and my mom's bawling her eyes out when I was telling the resident, like, I wanted to kill myself. That's how bad it was. And you walk in here and tell me that I need to figure it out? That's your job. Anyway, my best friend's mom, because she worked in the area, ended up coming to see me. My best friend messaged me, and then I'm like, I'm so embarrassed because I'm like, what am I going to say about my arm? So I told people that like I had burnt it on the straightener or something. It was stupid. But yeah, like that was the other anxiety inducing thing. But that was the only thing for a while that could calm me down. And you know, Dr. Gabor Mate talks about this a lot. A lot of people end up resorting to these kinds of things because the endorphins that are released when you hurt yourself, or over-exercising is another one, are what kind of bring you down. And like, that's dangerous. I didn't know that that's what it was, but I also think it was a cry for help because I was like, there's something wrong with me. I know now in that narrative, there's something wrong with me. If you've watched the other videos, started when I was really, really young. This was 10 years ago. So mental illness illiterate. We didn't, like, Clara Hughes had just started the Bell campaign. That's how, like, behind it was. 10 years now. We've got a lot. We've come far. So I want to get through this next part in detail. So there was a studio outside of the city that I guess was also turbulent and did not treat its dancers nice. So they ended up getting word of coming to our studio. So she was like under the guise of being like a safe place. And I remember when I was doing the Third Day Worship Center stuff, this happened when people would leave Third Day and then went to this other church in the city. And I remember when I was hearing this, I'm like, you guys, this literally happened at my dance studio. Anyway, yeah, so this first one happened in 2012, 2013. Then around the end of that 2013 year, we got this family. 4 months later, I'm messaging this kid's parent because I saw what happened that day. She just was going and going and going and going after this little girl. Well, she was like 12, but still, it's like, that's young. Brain-wise, that's a little girl. And she just wouldn't relent. And I also knew that this kid was also a highly sensitive kid. Just through recognizing patterns that I exhibited, but I was better at masking. So at that point, I couldn't, so I reached out to the kid and I had sent a little like meme and I was like, if you ever feel like this, you can always come talk to me, okay? And then I don't remember what happened. I ended up talking to the mom on Facebook and I was like, and she's like, okay, so that's why she has been crying this whole ride home. She won't tell me what's wrong. Again, folks, this illustrates what kids do to themselves when they are treated this way by a trusted adult who has power over them. We blame ourselves. And then our parents have no idea. And then it continues. But that perfectly illustrates my point. That's what I did to myself. I can't speak for anybody else. I mean, the only person I've got to go off of really from like young years is the scapegoat. And we all know what she was like. She was going to tell people. Yeah, she knew what was up. And she wasn't going to put up with this shit. Like, yeah, I saw that happening. And then eventually after those people, like I was graduating now at this point. That year, like we did really well comp-wise. I mean, emotionally, I was a hot mess. But then when I ended up in university, we all know I went to Queens, did the phys ed thing. I didn't end up making the dance team the first year, and my God, but this is consistent with the literature. I literally had like a nervous breakdown because if I wasn't Tiana, the competitive dancer, who was I? A lot of athletes who come from very sheltered, high intensity, it consumes your life backgrounds. This happens to them, especially when they get injured and they can no longer play. Like it can get really, really bad. And for years I beat myself up again, because that's what I do, about this meltdown. But now it makes sense. I'm like, oh, this is what athletes do. And this is why don't put all your eggs in one basket. Like parents, likely, and this doesn't mean that your kid's not talented, they're likely not going to be a professional dancer. They need to have other outlets. That's what's healthy. It's not healthy, and it's not something to encourage, in my opinion, to have a kid grow up and be hyper fixated on one thing. Because I wanted to do other things, but because I had gotten that reinforcement and I was dependent on my coach for her approval so that I could feel good about myself. Like, first of all, that's fucked. But then they feel trapped. And that's how I felt growing up. So then when it all comes crashing down, whether it be injury, graduating, whatever, we don't know who we are. It's also why people say don't specialize in sport before the age of 8. Actually, some researchers actually say 10 now. Yeah, I'm not saying you can't put your kid in dance. Like, pre-comp is starting to become a more popular thing with young kids, and I am all for that because it's just so much healthier. Do not put all your eggs in one basket is all I'm saying. That year too, she brought me back to fill in for someone who had gotten injured again in knee injuries and another knee injury. And I just felt super awkward and out of place. I wanted to help out and I was glad to be competing at least. But I just felt like I shouldn't be there. And I felt like everyone was mad at me. Like maybe that was perceived or like an incorrect perception. I don't know. But I just felt so out of place. I felt like I was problematic, like I shouldn't be there, and I was taking like their last year away and like all of this shit. And I just I didn't feel good about it. The other thing that happened when I was at Queens was I ended up coming out as gay. And I knew that my university friends weren't gonna have a problem with it, but mind you, a lot of people were homophobic growing up, so that's not unusual. It's not okay, but I was around a lot of people, dance, school, home, at the fair. It was just normal. It wasn't okay, but it was normal. But I remember being afraid. Obviously, we all fear what our parents are going to think. And like, at first it's a shock. It is a shock. But now, like, it's so... My grandpa wanted to plant a rainbow flower bed 2 years ago because we were picking out the flowers and doing the gardening during Pride Month. Like, that's what my family's like. At first they were scared because they didn't want me to get hurt. It was like, don't tell people because we don't want to see you get hurt. And then it changed to, we're so happy, we want rainbow flowers. Like, no, that's tacky as hell. Good, it's a nice gesture, but it's tacky. But I remember another big stressor for me was I was afraid that she would turn people against me again. Irrational, but that's what she did. She would make fun of... I remember a girl came out as gay at one of the other teams in the city. She was like, that's disgusting. Like, she's in change rooms with girls. And I was like, and that's what was playing in my head. I was like, Jesus Christ. So I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, but you're the favorite. Like, maybe she'll feel differently. I don't think she gave a fuck, honestly. But because she had said things like that in the past, I was worried that she could somehow turn like parents and kids against me. But she also, what she did growing up, and this also indicated to me that, and it stuck with me for years, like, being gay is not okay. Because what she would say is when like male dancers, male choreographers, whatever, for whatever fucking reason, would speculate about whether they're gay. Who gives a shit? Like, who are they? Happy? Are they working hard? Are they, you know, although I argue that not many of us were 100% happy at all times there. Regardless, that's not something to be discussing. And it's certainly not something to be discussing with teenagers and children, because teenagers are children behind the backs of their teammates. And she'd be like, no, he's not. No, his mom said so. And it's like, okay, so why are you indignant by it? Like, that told me as a kid growing up and a kid in that system that it wasn't okay. It was something to deny. Like, oh, he's not, it's fine. But what if he was? Would it be fine too? Like, so that's where I was getting those signals from. And like, if a gym teacher, me as a gym teacher, was doing that about a student in the school to their peers, that's so inappropriate. She would also talk about like whether or not girls had sex behind their back. Like, this, they're 17 and 18 years old. Why the fuck do you care? It's so inappropriate. It's so inappropriate. You don't need to be talking about these things, but that's what it was. So I had a little bit of purity culture sprinkled on that too. Yeah, like, nothing was secret. She could learn everything. I didn't get any retaliation for being gay, so yay, that was a good thing. But yeah, that last year of second last year of teaching, because I ended up going back, and then that was my last year. But that year, 2015, I was like, I can't do this anymore. She was picking apart all of a sudden how I was teaching again. She would come by the window and like stare. And then if she saw that like maybe one of the kids was drinking water, one was sitting on the floor or something, she'd like burst in, and I'd like have to like cover for the kids because I didn't want her to rage at them. I also didn't want her to rage at me. But she would be like that. She was so controlling about my teaching. I'm like, I'm in phys ed. I've been here for years. I know what you're like. I know what you want. I'm great with the kids. Why are you like this? So I was like, I couldn't do it anymore. I'm snarky this time. I'm sorry. There's so much has happened in the last like however many months since the other part of my story. And I'm just like, I'm fed up. I'm fed up with this behavior. So I was learning a lot in the phys ed program. It would be like my professors would say stuff and I'd be like, but my coach does that. Wait a minute. At this point, this is academia telling me these things. And I'm like, oh shit. So we weren't supposed to dance on these injuries. So she wasn't supposed to talk about us behind our backs to her friends. Okay, you're not supposed to scream at kids? Again, like, I literally needed a phys ed degree and a psych degree to tell me that what happened to me as a kid was fucked up because it was so normalized. Anyway, not funny, but I remember being afraid to tell her in 2015 that I couldn't teach that year. Ended up going back in 2017. And there was a moment of, I can't remember if this was the summer of 2017 or if this is the summer of 2018. Either way, there was a kid there who, again, was brought in very similar way. Oh my God, she's so cute. Oh, she's got so much potential. She was super cute and had so much potential. But the minute she started acting like, heaven forbid, a 6-year-old, she was a brat. That's what she was saying behind her back. She's a little girl. Either way, I watched her bully this kid all day one day. It was during the intensive week. And I was in charge of, like, I don't know, the kids who couldn't really do intensive like how we did. Arguably, we shouldn't have been doing intensive as much as we were, like the hours, but whatever. So I do like games and stuff with them. I watched her bully this kid all day. And I told my mom, I was like it didn't matter. I remember her going up to her with, I don't know, something she had made or whatever. And she was like, Coach, look what I did. And she's like, yeah, that's great, but I asked you to put that away 10 minutes ago. And I'm like, I know what this is. This happened to me at that age. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So I went home, told my mom. I was almost in tears because I'm like, it's vicarious trauma now. I'm watching this happen to other kids. I don't care what the kid did. No child deserves to be treated that way. So regardless, but like, I remember her talking behind the backs of kids. Eating disorders were also something. If you had an eating disorder, if you were speculated to having an eating disorder, it was an inconvenience. Parents these days, like, what are they doing to their kids? Like, what's going on? And I'm like it's an illness. Why are you treating it as an inconvenience? We don't even know if this person has an eating disorder. Why aren't you concerned for your dancers? Why are you irritated? Anyway, the other thing I noticed in that final year of teaching around 2017, 2018 was my anxiety started to come back. I had decreased my dose of Cipralex. The only time I was having severe anxiety was at the studio. And I was constantly afraid she was going to be mad at me. I remember being on the phone, coming home from the studio. Something had happened in one of my classes. It was fine. I was, again, just like, I got to make sure everything's okay because she's going to lose her shit on me, even though I'm like 23 at this point. My mom's like, I don't think you can teach there anymore. I'm like, oh, I certainly can't. I can't handle the way she treats the kids. I can't handle what they tell me she does. I can't handle worrying about this stuff anymore. And then the final like nail in the coffin was auditions that year. I had said I'd come back and do it. I had asked if for the summer, if I could work with the group of juniors, the little girl who came into my class and was like, Coach said we did really bad this weekend. That they were hyper. But I had built a connection with these kids. And she never responded back, and I was like, she's busy, whatever. I'm not entitled to her dancers. I just put it out there. But she then offered it to another choreographer who I actually danced on the dance team with this person. She's a lovely person, amazing dancer. But she had not put up with my coaches, but she had not put up with all that shit for years. But she was not produced by my coach. She was not in phys ed. Nothing to say, like, she was a good teacher, but like, you'd think you'd offer it to someone who you trained, who's taken your shit for years. And she had the audacity to offer this group in front of me at auditions that year. And I was like, enough is enough. Like, it didn't matter that I was Tiana who gave her goosebumps when I was 5. It didn't matter that I was Tiana doing double duty all those years. Didn't matter. So, yeah. So, I graduated from phys ed 2018, 2019. It was just before COVID. I can't remember shit. Oh my God. I think it was 2018. Maybe it was 2019. I don't know. Either way, I graduated before COVID. COVID happens. I'm on Reddit, find Third Day Worship Center stuff. And I think, and I know this, I so strongly wanted to help them. One, because I couldn't work. I've, again, immunocompromised. My doctor told me not to. Work with children, that would be a disaster. They catch everything. I catch everything they catch. So I had nothing to do. I have a lot of knowledge about the far right, about Christian fundamentalism, Christian nationalism. I credit the Third Day Worship Center survivors also for giving me the strength to do this, because they outed these people. Like, we got news crews involved. Clearly that's not my intention. I needed to do this for my own therapeutic thing. And also I'm so sick of having conversations with people and talking about all the fucked up shit that happened to us and how it still affects us to this day. I am almost like literally 2 months shy of being 30, and I still struggle. So yeah, thank you, Third Day Worship Center survivors, for having the balls to do that. I'm proud of you, and you have no idea how much you have helped me. Yeah. Ended up going to Nanaimo. That was a whole thing I'm not going to get into. People who have complex PTSD like me are very susceptible to being re-traumatized. Nanaimo, not Kingston. A lot of far-right stuff. There's a lot of racism. And then the convoy really freaked me out because I knew what was behind that, because I had done the Third Day stuff, and I know that stuff. I know Christian nationalism. I know how much they hate gay people. Like, so I came back, was beating myself up. Why can't you deal with shit? Like, ended up figuring out by working for a couple different people and then quitting. My body, I started to notice my body could react and tell me before I was conscious of it when I was in the presence of someone who was like my coach. And that really freaked me out. But it was kind of like, oh, sometimes listening to your body is the right thing to do. It goes against everything I was taught. But yeah, when I came back, she messaged me and asked if I could supply. And I was like, no, I do not have time. I'm trying to figure out different research things. I'm full-time at school. I'm pretty much full-time at the daycare. I can't. Like, I can't. Well, what if it's this person? No, I can't do it. What if it's just once or twice? Again, doesn't respect boundaries. No. Finally, I just gave up and was like, fine, whatever. I think I told this story before, but shows no boundaries. Last year, around May, I ended up going to one of the competitions there. I went to support the kids who, like, I taught them when they were little, and they're like in university now, because a lot of them, it was their final year. One of the kids was so anxious before her solo. It was like looking in a mirror. I'm like, this was me 10 years ago when she'd lose her shit, or when she was, you know, passive aggressive and angry about I don't know what. And that was another trigger for me. I ended up being like super dysregulated, like emotionally, for about a week and a half. But at the end of the day, like, you know, I don't need other people to believe me at this point anymore, because I have too much education and I have too many people in my corner from all different areas of my life, people who didn't even know I was a dancer. I have too much support. I'm too self-assured to know that this happened, and it really has affected me. And I knew it affected people that I was still speaking with, but the number of people who have messaged me, again, without saying too much, it's clear that there's something wrong. When people are telling me they've blocked out parts of their childhood, you guys, you don't do that on purpose. That's a coping strategy. I don't need to be a clinician or a PhD or any of that, a therapist, to know that that is a bad sign. Your brain does that to protect you. My brain didn't give a shit to protect me, because clearly I remember everything. Yeah. I'm glad that this was so validating for people. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Like, I feel like a weight has been lifted. I'm so glad this helped people. It's sad, and I'm glad that I did it, and I'm glad that I've been able to get through it in one piece. I cherish a lot of the really good memories. Like, don't get me wrong. A lot of good things happened. She had good days. The good things don't erase the very problematic things and the consequences of those things. But trauma lives in your body. It doesn't go away. It can heal 100%. I have yet to try EMDR. My therapist has helped me so much. I've come leaps and bounds in a year. But it's a privilege to work with children. I work with kids. I love working with kids. Like I said, I've had the privilege of learning from really, really good teachers and ECEs. This person has lost the privilege to work with children, in my opinion, and I stand behind that. Nothing. I've had too many people come talk to me. I've had too many people in my DMs. I know too much. There's so much harm, more than I thought there was. Too many kids are struggling. Too many, like, literal teenagers. And I want these people to know this happened to us. It's been going on for years. And if it's problematic to come forward and do the right thing, you gotta reassess, man. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. Like, again, I don't want to turn this into convincing people, but I think I've backed my stuff up enough. I've used really good sources, and I'm an expert of my own story, my own experiences. If that's not enough, then I don't know what will be. These are very, very vulnerable kids, and I've highlighted this too. You're developing around this system, the way you're being treated. And I highlighted how kids instinctively blame themselves. It keeps the parents in the dark. The kids who grow up in environments like this grow up and allow people to do this to them because they think it's normal. It's normal for their nervous system. No, it's not okay. And I'm never going to tell you that what happened was. It's not. There were great things that happened, and I'm glad of the positives that come out of it. But what about the damage done? She's not paying my therapy bills. I am. And I don't pay $160 an hour to overreact to something. This happened. I love my therapist. She's done a great job, and she deserves that $160 an hour. But I'm the one who's picking up the pieces, not my coach. Yeah, I don't cave to bullies. It's too important to protect children. Teach your kids how to stand up for themselves. Have conversations about mental health with them. There's so many conversations to be had. But anyway, thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Thank you for lending your ear and being valuable.